You don't belong here. Go back to where you came from, Haley snapped, her voice cutting through the hum of clinking plates and quiet conversation. The diner froze. Darnell slowly rose from his seat, his eyes locked on hers, not with rage, but with the kind of silence that demanded the whole room finally listen. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over Willow Creek, a postcard-perfect town nestled among rolling hills and quiet roads, where antique stores stood proudly next to ice cream parlors and family-owned bakeries. Its charm was the kind that made people slow down, take pictures, and forget the outside world for a while. For Darnell Brooks, the town looked like exactly the kind of place he needed. A 38-year-old widower from Chicago, Darnell had packed his car 2 days ago and hit the road with no clear destination, just a longing for peace, space to breathe, and maybe somewhere he could sit with the ache of grief without it swallowing him whole. He'd lost his wife 2 years ago, shot by an off-duty officer during a traffic stop that never should have turned fatal. Then, just 5 weeks ago, cancer had claimed his 14-year-old son. His world had grown unbearably quiet, and now the open road was his only escape. The Willow Creek Diner, with its neon sign and wraparound windows, looked like a good place to pause. A bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, the scent of sizzling bacon and brewed coffee wrapping around him like an old blanket. Inside, locals chatted over pie and sweet tea, waitresses in vintage aprons moved briskly between booths, and the occasional laugh echoed from a corner table. Darnell picked a seat by the window, nodding politely to a family as he passed. He wore dark jeans, a navy pullover, and a black baseball cap pulled low, not to hide, just to stay unnoticed. He'd barely been sitting 2 minutes when a waitress approached. She was young, early 20s at most, her blonde hair in a messy bun, her name tag reading Haley in loopy script. Her greeting was polite enough, but something in her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi there," she said, tone light but clipped. "What can I get you?" Darnell met her eyes and offered a small smile. "I'll have the chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, and a sweet tea. If it's not too much trouble. Could I get some extra hot sauce with that?" Haley jotted it down quickly and turned away before he could finish his thank you. He watched her disappear behind the counter, an uneasy flicker brushing across his chest. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe he was just reading into things. Still, something about her stiff shoulders told him he hadn't imagined her coolness. Time passed. 20 minutes. Then 30. Every table around him had been served. 2 couples who came in after him were already halfway through their meals. Haley walked past his booth 3 times without so much as a glance. He waited patiently, tapping his fingers on the table to the rhythm of the soft country music playing overhead, still holding on to hope that maybe it was just a mix-up. But the longer he sat, the more pointed the avoidance became. It wasn't just neglect, it was deliberate. Finally, Darnell raised his hand slightly as she passed again. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but clear. Haley stopped and turned toward him, jaw tight. "Yeah," she said. "Sorry to bother you," Darnell said, keeping his tone even. "But I ordered a while ago, and I just wanted to check." Her expression hardened. "Actually," she interrupted, loud enough for the nearby booths to hear, "that booth's been reserved. We don't usually serve people like you here." The room stilled. The casual clatter of forks and knives, the hum of conversation, it all stopped. Darnell blinked. "People like me," he repeated, calmly. Haley crossed her arms. "You heard me. You don't belong here. Why don't you take your attitude and go back to where you came from?" The words dropped like stones. A few customers shifted uncomfortably. Others froze, eyes wide, mouths slightly agape. No one said anything. No one moved. The silence was suffocating. Darnell took a breath, then another. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from restraint. He could have exploded, could have shouted, demanded she be fired on the spot. But instead, he stood slowly, deliberately. His chair scraped against the floor. He looked at Haley, then around the room at the silent, stunned faces. "You want to know where I come from?" he asked, voice low and firm. I come from Chicago. I come from a community where I've worked 20 years in logistics and operations, where I've helped youth get off the streets and back into schools. I come from a family that's been through hell, but still chooses to love people. I lost my wife to a badge and a bullet. I buried my son last month. And I drove here to find peace, not to be reminded that my skin somehow makes me unworthy of dinner. His voice didn't waver. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His truth rang louder than anything Haley could have screamed. I didn't come here to cause trouble, he continued, turning now to the rest of the diners. I came to eat, like every one of you. And you, he nodded toward Haley, decided that my presence threatened your comfort. No one looked him in the eye. A few dropped their gaze to their food. One woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. The saddest part? Darnell said, softer now. It's not what she said. It's that none of you said anything at all. He looked at Haley one last time, her face flushed red, arms now limp at her sides. I'll leave, he said, pulling a few bills from his wallet and setting them on the table. Not because you told me to, but because I have no desire to eat in a place where humanity is optional. He stepped away from the booth, walking past the stunned diners toward the door. The bell above jingled softly as he pushed it open. For a moment, no one moved. And then, like a match striking against flint, a slow clap echoed from the back of the room. One man. Then another. A quiet ripple of applause filled the space, not loud, not performative, but thoughtful, solemn. Darnell didn't turn back. He didn't need to. He walked down the sidewalk and into the fading light, shoulders square, heart heavy but proud. Behind him, the diner remained silent once more. But this time, the silence was not one of ignorance. It was the kind of silence that came right before something begins to change. The sound of that final clap still echoed faintly in the back of Haley's mind as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment above the laundromat on Maple Street. She had replayed the moment over and over, the look in Darnell's eyes, the hush of the diner, the words she spat like venom and the silence that followed. At first, she was angry, not at herself, but at the fact that he had spoken back, that he had embarrassed her in front of everyone, that people had clapped for him. The nerve, she thought that night. But the next morning, everything changed. A text from her coworker came in at 7:13 a.m., just a link. No caption. No emojis. Just the link. With a tired swipe, she opened it. And there it was, a grainy video, filmed from the corner booth, shaky but clear enough to see every frame, every word. Her words. The ones she hadn't realized were caught. The internet didn't miss a beat. Within hours, it was on local forums, then Reddit, then Twitter. By lunch, it had been shared by a regional journalist with the headline "Black Tourist Harassed in Small-Town Diner, Leaves in Silence, Leaves Behind a Message." By dinner, her name was trending in corners of the internet she didn't even know existed. The comments were ruthless. She said that with her whole chest. This is why we still talk about racism in 2025. Haley from Willow Creek? Hope you learn to live with yourself. And for the first time, she did. She really did. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a cold shame, thick and suffocating, the kind that made it hard to breathe. Customers stopped making eye contact. Her coworkers avoided her in the break room. Steve, the cook who'd once offered her extra pie at the end of long shifts, now looked at her with eyes that said, "I don't know who you are anymore." She deactivated her social media. But the video was everywhere. She couldn't unplug from what was inside her own head. And then, late one night, she did something she hadn't dared. She looked up Darnell. She found his name in one of the articles. Then his LinkedIn. Then, eventually, his personal page. She didn't expect to find much, but what she saw broke her even further. Posts about his late wife. A short tribute to his son. A post from 3 weeks ago, trying to find peace on the road. "If you see me out there, just say hi." Her hands trembled as she typed. She didn't craft it for optics. She didn't write it to be forgiven. She just needed to say it. I don't expect you to respond. I know I don't deserve kindness, but I want to apologize. What I said to you was cruel, ignorant, and full of hate. I've never had to think about what words like that mean to someone else. I never thought they'd hurt more than just someone's feelings. I didn't understand how deep it could go. I do now. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to be better. She didn't even know if he'd see it. But the next morning, there it was. A reply. Change is a verb, not a sentence. That was all he wrote. And somehow, it was enough to start something. The next day, Haley called out of work and drove to the local library. She checked out books she never thought she'd touch, books on racial identity, American history, stories of Black Americans whose names had never made it into her high school curriculum. She sat through diversity training at a community center in the next town over. She walked into a cultural education workshop and sat silently in the back row. She volunteered at a food bank that served primarily Black and Hispanic families. She didn't talk about what she had done. She didn't broadcast it online. She just kept showing up. One Saturday afternoon, a month and a half later, the diner had just wrapped up the lunch rush when it happened. Haley was behind the counter refilling the sugar caddies when a gruff voice cut across the hum of conversation. "This place is starting to feel like a bus station," a man at the bar muttered. "Don't know why we're hiring people who don't even belong in this country." The room stilled. The words weren't directed at her, but they cut just the same. Haley looked up and saw the target of his comment, a young Black waitress named Janelle, no more than 19, who had just joined the staff 2 weeks prior. Her eyes were wide, hands trembling slightly as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of the man. The insult hung in the air. Familiar. Ugly. And for a heartbeat, Haley froze, feeling that familiar weight in her throat. But then something shifted. She took a breath, stepped out from behind the counter, and walked straight to the man. "Sir," she said, voice steady, "you need to leave." He blinked, clearly surprised. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said. "This diner is a place for everyone. And that kind of talk isn't welcome here. You can finish your coffee elsewhere." The room went silent again, but this time, not out of shock. It was anticipation. Janelle's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. The man scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and tossed a few bills on the counter before storming out. The moment he was gone, Janelle walked up to Haley and whispered, "Thank you." Haley didn't say anything. She just nodded. A few days later, she was called into the manager's office. Her heart dropped. She figured the complaints had finally caught up with her. Mr. Carter sat behind his desk, glasses low on his nose, reviewing a folder. "Haley," he said without looking up, "how are things going?" "Fine," she said cautiously. He looked up. "You think I haven't noticed? What you did the other day? That was different. A few months ago, I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself." She waited, breath caught in her chest. "You should know something," he continued. "When the incident happened with Mr. Brooks, he reached out to us. Told us not to fire you. Told us to wait. To watch. Said if you really changed, we'd see it. And we did." Haley swallowed. "I don't expect anything, sir. I'm just trying to be better." Mr. Carter leaned back, finally setting the folder down. "That's why we're promoting you. Staff supervisor. You'll be in charge of onboarding, setting behavioral expectations, leading new training. This place needs to change. You're going to help do it." Haley stared at him, unable to speak. She'd come in expecting punishment and was walking out with a second chance. Not because she earned forgiveness, but because she'd chosen to earn growth. That night, as she walked home under the orange glow of street lamps, she passed the diner and paused for a moment, watching the lights inside flicker. She thought of Darnell. Of the words he spoke. Of the words she couldn't take back. But more than anything, she thought about what he said in his message: change is a verb. It's not a destination. It's something you do, every day. And she wasn't done yet. The memory of that night, standing under the glow of the diner's flickering sign, replaying Mr. Carter's words in her head, stayed with Haley for days. You're going to help change this place. She'd never imagined anyone would say something like that to her again, not after what she'd done. But as she showed up to work each morning, clipboard in hand, training new hires on how to treat every customer with dignity, how to listen more than speak, and how to recognize when silence is a form of complicity, she began to feel something she hadn't in months: purpose. Her days were fuller now, packed with more than just orders and table numbers. They were filled with second chances, tiny victories, and slow forgiveness, most of all, of herself. Still, there were moments, quiet, unshakable ones, when she wondered if Darnell would ever return. If he would ever walk through those doors again. And then one gray Tuesday morning, he did. Haley was wiping down the front counter, chatting softly with a young busser when the door's familiar chime rang out. She looked up casually, expecting a regular or maybe a passing couple. Instead, she froze. There he was, Darnell Brooks, wearing a dark peacoat and a calm expression, his eyes scanning the diner before they landed squarely on her. For a second, the world seemed to pause. He gave her a small nod, not cold, not distant, but measured. She straightened up, her hands suddenly clammy. "Good morning," she said, forcing her voice steady. "Would you like a booth or the counter?" Darnell looked around for a moment before sliding onto one of the stools at the counter. "Counter's fine," he said. Haley reached for a mug and poured him a fresh cup of coffee, her heart thudding with every movement. She placed it gently in front of him. "Coffee. On the house." Darnell looked down at the cup, then back at her. "Thank you." She swallowed, then leaned slightly closer, speaking low enough that only he could hear. "I never got to say it to your face. I'm sorry. Not for how it affected me, but for how I treated you. I've spent the last few months learning what I should have known all along. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to hear it." Darnell studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Before he could answer, the door opened again. A gust of wind swept in with three sharply dressed men in suits, out of place against the rustic wood and old linoleum of the Willow Creek diner. They scanned the room like they were looking for someone, and when their eyes landed on Darnell, the tallest one smiled and approached. "There he is," the man said, reaching out a hand. "Mr. Brooks, we've been trying to track you down for weeks." Haley stepped back instinctively as Darnell rose and shook the man's hand. "Didn't think I'd be found this far off the grid," Darnell said, half amused. The man chuckled. "Our firm has been following your investments for a while now. When we heard you were in this part of the country, we figured it was worth the drive." He handed Darnell a card. "We'd love to discuss partnering on our new development initiative, minority-owned startups in underserved communities. We think you'd be a great fit." Haley blinked. "Investor? Development initiatives?" She looked at Darnell again, really looked, and realized in that moment that he wasn't just someone passing through. He was someone who had influence, reach, and options. He could have buried her with a tweet, ended her job, shamed her before the entire world. And he hadn't. Instead, he had chosen something far harder: to let her grow. As the suited men stepped aside to give Darnell a moment, he looked at Haley once more. "You didn't know who I was," he said, tone gentle. "And honestly, it wouldn't have mattered. It's not about who I am. It's about who we choose to be, even when we think no one's watching." She nodded, tears stinging the back of her eyes. "I know. And I'm still choosing." Darnell smiled slightly. "That's what matters." He took a sip of the coffee, then looked around the diner. "Place feels different." Haley glanced around too. The staff was more diverse now. The customers too. There was an ease to the room that hadn't existed before. "We've been working on that," she said quietly. "It's not perfect. But we're trying. Darnell nodded. Trying's where change starts. The businessmen soon rejoined him, and as they moved to a booth to begin their meeting, Haley returned to the counter, her hands trembling but her chest full. The rest of the shift flew by in a blur. That night, as she closed out the register, her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her apron pocket and froze when she saw the sender, Darnell Brooks. She opened the message slowly. "Congratulations on your promotion. I heard about it. Real leadership starts with humility. And you've shown a lot of it. Keep going. Proud of the path you're on." Haley stared at the screen, barely breathing. She didn't deserve his kindness. But she would work every day to honor it. Over the following weeks, things in town began to shift. Customers who had once watched silently now spoke up when they saw mistreatment. A new community coalition had been formed to foster inclusivity across local businesses, and Haley had been invited to speak at the first meeting. She was nervous. But she showed up. She shared her story, not just the shame, but the learning. She didn't ask for sympathy. She only asked people to listen. And they did. The diner itself had become something more than a restaurant. It was a symbol now of how quickly things can fall apart, but also how healing can begin. Every time a new waitress walked through the door, Haley greeted her personally. Every time someone looked uncomfortable, she paid attention. She couldn't undo the past. But she could make sure it never repeated itself. One afternoon, while prepping for the evening rush, she looked out the window and saw two teenage girls filming a TikTok on the corner where Darnell had once stood. They weren't mocking anything. They were reenacting his speech, the one he gave before he walked out. They'd memorized his words. They'd shared them. Haley felt something shift inside her again. Darnell had come looking for peace and found pain. But what he left behind, what he chose to leave behind, was bigger than either of them could have expected. And now, thanks to him, Willow Creek wasn't just known for its antique stores and cobblestone charm. It was known as the place where one man's dignity became a spark, and where one woman's failure became the start of something worth building. As the author of this story, I want to leave you with a reflection that goes far beyond the walls of a small-town diner. This isn't just a tale about racism or redemption, it's a story about how our worst moments don't have to define us, and how silence, whether passive or loud, always carries consequences. When Darnell Brooks walked into that diner, he carried more than grief, he carried dignity, restraint, and the quiet strength of someone who's been wounded deeply but still chooses grace. His refusal to retaliate in hate wasn't weakness, it was leadership. And in doing so, he held up a mirror not only to Haley, the waitress who wronged him, but to every single person who stood by and said nothing. But just as important is Haley's journey. It reminds us that ignorance is not always a permanent condition, but a starting point. She could have run from her shame. She could have buried it. Instead, she leaned into it. She did the work, not for applause, but because she knew that change without action is just decoration. Her growth wasn't instant. It was messy. It was slow. But it was real. And that's what true transformation looks like. To our listeners and viewers here at Us, Justice Stories, I want to say this: we all have moments in life where we have a choice, to speak up or stay silent, to lean into discomfort or back away, to let shame harden us or soften us into something better. The road to justice isn't paved with perfection. It's paved with small, brave steps in the right direction. So if you've ever been silent when you should have spoken, or if you've ever judged someone before you knew their story, you're not alone. What matters now is what you choose to do next. Will you stay the same or grow? Will you look away or lean in? Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for listening with your heart. And thank you for being part of a community that believes in justice, in second chances, and in the quiet power of doing what's right, even when it's hard. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. And most of all, live it. Because stories like this don't just belong in diners or headlines, they belong in the everyday moments where real change begins.